We're the largest snacking company in the world.
That everyone in the business is a leader and have a role to play.
So it just naturally made sense that, my career would progress.
And I wish someone had told me when I was in high school that that was an option.
It's all about maintaining relationships and
have such a wide array of academic backgrounds in the CCAS.
A strong network of women here to help you.
Well, hey guys. So today we are joined by Gavin Lind from the Minerals Council of Australia. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Rebecca, and hello to all your listeners. It's lovely to be here.
So first off, who are the Minerals Council of Australia? What do you guys actually do?
Well, the Minerals Council of Australia is the peak industry body for the exploration, extraction, and also the processing sector. So we represent about easily 80% of all of those sectors that look after the minerals interests of Australia, and particularly it's an industry that has almost 60% of Australia's exports, so a very important sector for the Australian economy.
Yeah, amazing. So you're talking mining here, so all those big mining sites that, are all around Australia, you are the peak body for. Was that right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, cool. And then what about your role within the Minerals Council of Australia? What do you do?
Well, Rebecca, I look after the workforce skills, education and training side of things, and also have a policy interest in health and safety. So it's all about the skills of today, the skills of tomorrow, and the workforce of today, the workforce of tomorrow, and all those changes that are happening and the exciting things that are happening in our industry in relation to those.
Yeah, cool. So could you share maybe a little bit about what are the, the future skills for the mining industry, and, what sort of things should students be sort of casting their minds towards in terms of what the future might look like for them?
It's a great question, Rebecca, because it's an industry that when people immediately think of it, I don't think that you necessarily think about the technological advances that are happening in the industry. And when I mention technological advances, we talk about things like artificial intelligence, automation, even robotics, but it's fundamentally big data and real-time big data that is the opportunity in the industry. So we did a study beginning of last year, I think it was now, and EY identified that of all the occupations in the minerals industry, so in that sector, 77% of them are changing. And they're changing as a result of technology. So some of those are going to be needing new skills, being upskilled or reskilled to take account of the technological changes for those occupations. So you're finding that there's this transition in our industry. And I think a really good example of this is a surveyor, for example. So someone, a surveyor technician that might work in the industry, they might be constructing roads or, inspecting, hard to access faces as open pits get created. Many of those have become drone operators because a drone has got the surveillance equipment on it that a surveyor in the past would have had to carry around into the operation, be in the way of machinery and the like. So now you're taking that person out of that and giving them new skills to operate a drone to now do the job that they used to do and do it in a more enhanced and more technologically interesting way.
Yeah, so cool. So what are sort of some of the subjects that that students should sort of be looking at while they're at high school, do you think, that might, help them get into the mining industry in the future?
Well, we can never articulate more in a more impressive way that STEM, and more STEM.
Yeah.
But I think, you mustn't as a high school student be afraid of STEM, because I think there is, each one of those is a unique element. It's science and technology and engineering and mathematics. And I think in our industry, perhaps we are focusing more on the engineering and technology side, but understand also that, maths and science play a very important role. And when you think about the big data I mentioned earlier and the large amount of data, we certainly, a growing career in the industry is data science and data analytics. So that's more the mathematical side of things. So as a student, be curious and be constantly aware that, STEM futures, are there. And in our industry particularly, we'll be looking for people with STEM backgrounds.
Yeah, great. And why would you say that the industry is such a good industry to be a part of? Like, why would you urge more young men and women who are at high school to consider the industry that you're in?
The industry is very exciting. It's for the technological changes that I described, but it's also an industry that by and large has operations which are in remote and regional Australia, wonderful places to live, wonderful communities to which you can be a significant part of, from a community basis. It's a lot of camaraderie that goes with this industry. I think it's worth mentioning that there's 240,000 men and women who work in the operational side of industry. But when you add the downstream, the value added, like it's called the mining equipment and technology services side of it, there's 1.1 million Australians working in that broader industry. Wow. So that's almost 1 in 10 Australians work or are related to work in the minerals industry. So I think it's an industry where you might think, well, am I going to be working in operations, and will I be in these big machines or nearby these big machines? Certainly that's one of the career paths. But there's also the professional and technology services side of it. So consulting into and working on aspects that aren't necessarily in operations, but very important for operations.
Yeah, I guess that's another one of my questions is there's a lot of like preconceptions and misconceptions, I think, about the mining industry, that you fly in, fly out sort of work, you're in big machinery, but there's so much more to it than just that. Like as you were touching on with the technology side of things. Now, just a bit about yourself. How did you end up in this industry? Have you always had a sort of interest in mining, or what's your career journey been so far?
Well, Rebecca, thought I would be a geologist. That's what when I was in high school, I thought that's good. That sounds cool. At school, I loved geography, and believe it or not, I also did woodwork as one of my subjects at school. And I wanted to, I had this idea I was going to work with my hands, and I wanted to do something kind of practical. And I read about this thing called a geologist, which was not only working with a reverse science, because the Earth ultimately is a finished science experiment. And geologists kind of have to work it backwards to understand how did the Earth become what it is now. And at the time I was doing some research, this is many years ago, and you might be able to pick up from my accent, I'm not Australian originally, I'm South African in fact. And I wrote away to some of the mining companies curious to find out more information. Back then we didn't have things like the internet. You had to do a handwritten letter, and one of them
You're not that old, surely.
Well, it was South Africa at the time, perhaps. And one of them wrote back saying, it's wonderful that you are interested in this career in geology, but have you heard about mining engineering? And they sent me this information pack about what mining engineers do. And one of the things I loved about that, and why I chose that as a career, was it integrated my interest in geology, but it also activated interest in what the engineering side of things might be. And I think the idea of being an engineer really stuck with me. So I went off to uni. I went to uni in Johannesburg. I grew up in Cape Town, so I left home to do that. And my journey ultimately took me in such interesting ways, because of course your early part of your career always needs to be around getting that time in the field and gaining the practical experience. But mine took me into an academic track. I ended up having an opportunity to do a PhD, and that brought me to Australia at the time. I ended up in the university sector, so I was a lecturer for a period of time. And when I moved to Australia, it was in Kalgoorlie, in fact, where I was at the Western Australian School of Mines for a few years before moving to Melbourne, where I picked up this job with the Minerals Council of Australia. So I feel that the career trajectory I've had, and yes, correct, I've only ever worked for the mineral sector, whether it was in South Africa or Australia, but it's the incredible variety of the work. You will travel internationally with this role. You work in interesting places. You'll meet amazing people, and you'll be so surprised as to you never stop learning ever. And that's, I think, a really wonderful part of my experience in the mining industry.
Well, that sounds awesome. And what gives you probably the most satisfaction in your role?
Well, the role that I have now is knowing that the industry is changing and seeing the capability of young people coming into the industry now as the future workforce, but also seeing how the current workforce are so interested in the changes that are happening to their roles and how excited they are about the skilling opportunities for them to transition into new and interesting roles. So it's fascinating to watch, new people wanting to come into the industry, people who are already there, wanting to make it a safe, productive, and respectful workplace.
Yeah. And so part of your role, you said you've got something to do with safety. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we look after the safety policy as well. So it's the Minerals Council, as an Australian-wide, membership base of the members themselves have this ideal of being fatality-free in our industry. Everyone deserves to go home safely and in a healthy way, and also deserves to come to workplaces which are respectful. And that's part of the big policy work that we're busy with, and continue to ensure that our safety standards in an industry that is so small, an industry that has high risk, but it's the risk management that is applied is honestly some of the best in the world.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. And now, what pathways are available for students? So if there's students out there listening, what would you say is the best pathway to sort of get into the industry?
The best pathway, there's obviously multiple pathways. So there's a professionals route. So if you're thinking about going to uni, there's opportunities for you to study engineering or science related topics. And of course, there's the traditional minerals related degrees, such as minerals geoscience or geology, mining engineering as a specific engineering discipline. And there's also extractive metallurgy, which is a minerals processing and applied chemical engineering route. But of course, those are just some of the minerals related disciplines. But of course, the industry employs civil engineers, mechanical engineers, and those kinds of disciplines that work on the full gambit of road building, or maintaining big machines, or designing new machines and making strategic improvements to those. So those are some of the professional routes in. Of course, the industry employs lawyers, accountants. There's traditional roles like that for a large number of people. Then the vocation education training track, that certainly is another way in, because the trades route is a very important part of the industry. If you think about these big machines that need maintaining, you almost need super tradespeople, or highly qualified, highly trained tradespeople to fault find and fix some of these, very unique bits of equipment that don't exist in the everyday life. Yeah. So there's auto electricians, fitters, welders, a whole gambit of array of boiler makers and the like. So a lot of the licensed occupations, for example, working in confined spaces, forklift drivers, all these traditional type trade, there certainly is a space and a place for every one of those in our industry.
Yeah, it's so vast, isn't it? It's
yes.
Such a huge industry. So cool. And just finally, what advice would you give students out there, or, thinking back to when you're at high school, what advice do you wish that you received, or what advice would you give to students out there right now?
Well, I remember my father particularly saying to me at the time when I was doing subject choices, is you absolutely have to take science and you have to take maths. And I think that was sound advice, even though at the time, some of my friends weren't that interested in taking this. I'm glad I stuck with it, because you don't want to self-select out of an opportunity to take on engineering or STEM related higher education. And I think that's good advice that I got. I'd like to think that, listen to your parents, listen to your friends, but also make an independent decision. That, I know it might sound hard, but it sets you up so well for an array of opportunities going forward. So that's what I'd like to say, and or advice I would give, and encourage people, youngsters, young people, just keep reading, have an active interest in the world, look at the questions you'd like to answer. I don't think it's necessarily about answering the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, or something like that. It's about, what questions would you like to answer? And hopefully that gives you some insight into the type of career that you might want to explore.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Gavin. It was really great to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Rebecca. I really enjoyed our time.